out to your house, we've taken a look around and given you a quote. Now you've received your quote, you're looking through it, and you've got various camera models, a bit of technical jargon. But the main thing you see is 1080p, 2 megapixel, 5 megapixel, 8 megapixel, 4K. And you're a bit stuck really. What do you really need? So today we're going to talk about the difference in resolution between these three cameras. So what we have here is a 2 megapixel camera, 5 megapixel camera and an 8 megapixel camera. So just looking at the boxes, they all look quite similar. The only real difference is they've got different sensors which will record at different resolutions. So what we've done, we've got our test rig set up here. We're going to record a bit of footage and just sort of show you why you'd need higher resolution or whether you really need it, depending on what your needs are. So to show you the difference, we're just going to unbox them really quickly and then we'll get some footage just to show you the difference between the resolution. Okay, so here we've got the 2 megapixel camera or 1080p, which is your standard high definition HD signal. Fantastic. So there you go, nice little turret. This one in particular has a 2.8mm lens, which will give you roughly a 90-degree field of view. All of these have the same field of view, so hopefully there shouldn't be too much of a discrepancy between them. So put you there. Right, now we've got the 5 megapixel camera. And we'll just open him up really quick. Now this one comes in a nice striking black. We have some white ones, but I've installed them somewhere, so we're going to have to go with the black ones. Other than the colour, you could not tell these apart. Even on the label, on the cable, it doesn't tell you what the resolution is, so really it's down to what the picture quality looks like at the end. So there you go. 2, 5, now the 8 megapixel, still got its security seal on. Now the only reason I'm wearing a coat today is it is about 2 degrees in here, so I'm absolutely freezing. Hence why I've got my nice big parka on. Okay, so here you go, 8 megapixel camera. Let's get him out. So 8 megapixel, often shown as 4K. You know, pretty standard. The only physical difference that you can see here is it's got a square viewing hole there, rather than circular on this one, if you can see from over there. Okay, so we'll get these plugged in, grab some footage, and just show you what the difference is.
Already you can see that the 2 megapixel camera is a lot blurrier than the 4K camera. Also the 5 megapixel camera looks fantastic as well. So what we're going to take a quick look at is we're going to do a quick digital zoom. So when we zoom in digitally, this isn't like a motorized camera zoom. This is just us zooming in on the image and using all the information the camera's recorded digitally rather than a motorized zoom. So as you can see, this is quite blurry. You can't really see any texture on the wall here, and you can't really see what's on the sheet of paper there. So if we go to our 5 megapixel camera and we zoom that bad boy in, so that looks about the same size, you can see already there's a lot of detail on the wall around the picture. The piece of paper there already looks a fair amount sharper, and already, you know, that's a 3 megapixel jump, and you can really tell it between these two cameras. So what we're going to do, we're going to jump onto the 8 megapixel camera and just give that a quick zoom. There we go, that's about the same size. So already that is just a lot of detail around here. You can see a lot of the paint marks on the wall, you can see a lot of the texture on the cinder block, and this sheet of paper here, the resolution test, just looks a hell of a lot clearer than either of the two other images. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to zoom back out on all three cameras, and we're going to introduce my lovely assistant. Okay, so Unfortunately, I couldn't afford a lovely assistant, so I've had to use myself. So let's take a look. Now, at a first glance, you can see that the 2 megapixel camera, it looks alright, it looks okay. The 5 megapixel camera already looks a fair amount sharper, but you may have noticed that the 4K camera seems a little bit mushy or blurry, and we're going to look into that a little bit more in a second. So what we're going to do, we're going to zoom back in on this ugly mug. Let's take a quick look at what we've got here. So the 2 megapixel camera, as expected, not a lot of detail. You can definitely still tell it's me, but in fairness, I was stood about 2.5 meters away from the camera. So if we skip forward a couple of frames, you can't really see much of a difference there. It stays fairly the same. Now the 5 megapixel camera, already you can see a lot more detail. You can see some of the hairs on my chin. You can see a bit of the redness and tiredness around these tired old eyes. If we jump forward a bit, it picks up a fair amount of detail. Now, this is where things get a bit complicated. So when you hear the word 4K, you immediately assume that the image is going to be crystal clear. But as you can already see, it does look a fair amount blurry. The background looks absolutely fine, but the problem is on the face. So if we jump forward a couple of frames, you can see that between each frame there's quite a lot of movement. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. But all in all, it's a fairly good picture quality. Okay, so we've jumped onto the webcam just to sort of give final thoughts. I think we've learnt a fair amount from that video. What I was expecting from that wasn't the same as what we've got. So I was expecting the 4K camera to absolutely blitz the 2 megapixel and the 5 megapixel, but what we found out is with still images, it looks fantastic. Great. The moment you have any moving parts across that, it just turns into a blurry mess. Now that isn't to say that 4K doesn't have its place. With budget systems, I would always avoid it, because to get the level of detail, they need to make cutbacks elsewhere, which is why they only record between 8, 10, 12 frames per second. In this instance, our 4K camera only records at 8 frames per second. I did go through the settings to see if we could bump it up. However, 8 was the max there, but it's purely because of the amount of data that you need to send down the coax. These cameras in particular, like I've just mentioned, were HD analog. If you do have a need for 4K, you're going to be far better off with an IP solution, with more powerful cameras that are going to record at a higher frame rate. As we've shown in this video, with the 5 megapixel camera recording at 25 frames per second, in comparison with the 8 frames per second of the 4K, those moving images are going to look a lot clearer. So if you are considering a budget system for your home, then stay away from 4K. 5 megapixel, absolutely fantastic. The price difference between 2 megapixel and 5 megapixel these days is pennies, really. Maybe a couple of pound here, a couple of pound there. But if you're going for a HD analog system and your installer recommends 2 megapixel, ask him what the difference is between 2 and 5. You never know, it might only be a grand total of 20, 30 pounds extra. But in my opinion, 5 megapixel for a budget system is definitely the sweet spot. Following on from this video, what we're going to do is we're going to get some more high-end IP devices. We're going to get some 4K cameras that can record at 25 frames per second. We're going to get some 4 megapixel cameras, as they don't do 5 in the IP range that I know of from Hikvision anyway. And we're also going to get a couple of 2 megapixel cameras. Okay, and what we're also going to do is, if one of our very kind suppliers will let us borrow one, is get our hands on a 12 megapixel camera. Now, I personally don't think there's a need for these at the moment in the market. You're looking to spend a lot of money on one of these devices. But, again, it'd be really interesting to see how it stacks up against the 2 megapixel, the 4 megapixel and the 8 megapixel cameras. So I really hope this video has helped you to make a decision on what system you're going to buy. If you've managed to find your way to this video because you've been quoted on a CCTV system and you want a bit more information, then fantastic. I really hope it's helped. Comment on here and we can help with any technical questions you might have. Always happy to help. Until next time, see you later.